There are many examples of how even the most successful entrepreneurs and business managers can fail when they put personal conviction and opinion ahead of data. Andy Grove, Intel's legendary CEO, committed the business to video conferencing equipment in the late 1990s. Jeff Immelt, another storied CEO, bet GE's future on the industrial Internet of Things. The browser company Mozilla reportedly spent $400 million on a new phone operating system. These are decisions made on instinct that failed. So how does a corporate explorer replace or at least supplement instincts and opinions with data and evidence to demonstrate whether an idea is worth pursuing or if it requires a pivot or even a shutdown? How does a corporate explorer answer questions that have a major potential to jeopardize the project's progress and ultimately its future success, if not addressed upfront? Big questions to get through on today's episode of the Corporate Explorer. Just a reminder that the Corporate Explorer series is brought to you by Wazoku. Wazoku helps large organizations create effective, sustainable innovation ecosystems that accelerate efficiency gains and new value growth. And it does this through intelligence enterprise software that connects and harnesses the power of employees, suppliers, startups, universities, and a unique Wazoku crowd of over 700,000 plus global problem solvers. Wazoku calls this connected collective intelligence, and you can find our friends at Wazoku at www.wazoku.com. So today's episode describes how incubation tests unproven assumptions of an idea for a new business by de-risking each element before committing scarce resource to the project. It's a great pleasure to welcome the co-authors of the Corporate Explorer Fieldbook and a chapter entitled Business Experiments, De-Risking Execution Spend Through Experiments, Sarah Spoto and Vincent Ducret. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
It's great to have you guys. Sarah, maybe you'll start by introducing yourself and how you got involved in this chapter, and then we'll come to Vincent, and then we'll get stuck into the chapter.
Thanks again for having me here. I'm Sarah Spoto. At the time when this chapter was written, I was working in China, in Shanghai, with General Motors. I was the director of strategy, innovation, as well as brand strategy for the organization. And it was really an incredible opportunity for me. I had been working at the headquarters in Detroit for GM for a number of years, and to go to a region to really build a startup within this large multinational corporation was honestly a dream come true for me. I consider myself an entrepreneur, but of course, being in corporate, sometimes you don't always get those opportunities to do something truly entrepreneurial. And in this case, I did. And so I'm really proud to say that we had leadership who very much supported our efforts in taking an experimentation approach to how we developed the offerings for this new business model, and doing it in conjunction with more traditional methods like market research, right? And I think those complemented each other very well. So my role there, I was actually employee number 4 on the team. So while I have this fancy sounding title, I wore a lot of hats and was really helping to drive innovation and agile methodology and bring this experimentation approach to the business, while at the same time also building our brand there as well.
Brilliant, Sarah. And so great to have you. And it's great to have somebody who's done the work and has all the scar tissue and all the arrows in the back for doing that work as well, which really makes it real. And Vincent, maybe you'll introduce yourself as well, and then we'll describe the chapter, but also the frameworks that exist in the chapter.
With great pleasure. And thanks again for the invitation. And so nice to see you again, Sarah. So in fact, I have a computer engineer background, okay? And by the way, I'm just calling you today from the place where I graduated more than 20 years ago, EPFL in Lausanne. So I started really my career as a software developer. So I was exposed very early to all those extreme programming, agile way of thinking, of working. And I worked several years for Sun Microsystems. Probably some of you might remember this company. And then I moved to the other side of the mirror, I used to say, because I spent 15 years in corporate environment. So when I joined Sarah on this project, I was used, I will say, to the corporate world. So I know what might be the challenge, what might be, I will say, the problems they may face. So I spent 15 years in corporate environments, having worked for different departments. And the last 6-7 years, I was part of the transformation organization, moving a very famous company from business-centric to customer-centric. So really adopting a much more customer-centric approach for this company. And I have also the opportunity today to teach business transformation and innovation principles in a different university in St. Gallen or in Geneva. And I joined ChangeLogic 2.5 years ago as a consultant to help company to grow beyond their core business. So really, more or less, I will say helping company like Sarah was working for to explore, test, and scale new venture and new business. And this is how I will say, working with Sarah on this very interesting and passionate project for GMPI in China.
Brilliant. We have the perfect people in the room to get both sides of the story as well. And I thought we'd start by that. So Vincent, you've taught other people the frameworks, but also you've used those frameworks in organizations, which is a totally different thing than just teaching them the whole time. So we're going to tee us up for one of the great diagrams that's in this chapter, the business learning life cycle. And I'll show that on the screen in a moment. But just to tee you up, you say the first impulse for many corporates is to trust their employees' experience, knowledge, and skills to address uncertainties. They have earned this trust by delivering high performance results in the past from the existing businesses for many years. However, the reality is that rarely an idea survives its first contact with a customer. The uncertainties of an emerging business make your first ideas susceptible to bias, meaning that there is a strong correlation between the trust approach and the failure of corporate innovation. And then you outline steps to perform iterative experimentation from assumption identification through experiment design and execution to data-driven decision-making. And you use an approach that Sarah used in China with General Motors China Premium Import. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, Vincent, I'd love if you'd introduce us, and I'll show on the screen this great diagram.
Thank you, Aidan. So in fact, one of the challenge of corporates where they are launching new ventures is that they are most of the time entering a world of uncertainties, something that they never explored before. And the higher risk they can take is just to rely on the past experience to take decisions for something which is completely new for them. And this is the big difference between explorations and exploitations. Exploitations, you have probably decades of success where you have fine-tuned everything to work perfectly. But usually you cannot use this experience, this knowledge, to explore a new world. And this is why you need to adopt this de-risking approach that we have illustrated through this loop called business experiments. And for this, you usually start by stating all the key assumptions, hypotheses you are making about your new ventures. Those might be related to the customers you think you will deliver a value proposition. It might be related to the problem you think you are addressing, as well as to the value proposition itself. And maybe the ecosystems you think you need to put in place to deliver the value proposition. So you start first by listing, establishing all those key hypotheses you are making. Usually you can say, what must be true for my idea to work, okay? Because if this is not true, I might be, I will say, doing the wrong stuff for the wrong people, okay? So once you have done this one, you can move to a step 2, which is about prioritizing those assumptions, hypotheses, because you cannot address everything at the same time. Will you be able to de-risk at 100% of business? No, okay? If you do this, in 6 years, you are still de-risking, I will say, an idea. But they are very burning risk that you have to tackle as soon as possible, because you know that if you are wrong, you might probably, I will say, to move back a few weeks, if not months, in the past to correct something. So this is why you need to prioritize your hypothesis. And looking usually at what I call RATs, your riskiest assumption to test, okay? This is, I would say, the one that are the most dangerous for your project. This is where usually sometimes you put the dust below the carpet, expecting that the dust will never pop up again. Don't do this, okay? Look at those one, even if this one is putting in danger the project you are working on. Then once you have identified those riskiest assumptions to test, this is where the most interesting part starts for me, and probably the most creative one is designing experiments. How can you invalidate your assumptions? By getting real data evidence from your target customers. And this is also applicable for B2C and B2B model, from your partner as well, okay, in the B2B models. And when I mean, this is where you need highly creative, because most of the time, you don't have anything tangible to show to your customers. You are still at a very early stage. So how can you test with your customers typical willingness to pay, willingness to acquire your solutions, okay? When this solution still does not exist. And when I mean you need to be creative, because you need to go beyond the traditional way of testing with your customers, which are asking them or making a survey, okay? Which is the easiest way, I will say, to get data from your customers, but maybe the easiest way as well to get biased data, okay? And to not get any proof of what you are really, I will say, doing, if it is right or wrong for your customers. Once you have done your experiments, of course, you will collect learnings, okay, Aidan? And those learnings might be telling you that you are right or wrong. At the end, it doesn't matter. It just gives you, I will say, the data you need to take decisions. And based on those learning, then you can decide to go for the next iteration, for the next loop, where you will look maybe at the second riskiest assumptions you have to test, okay? And maybe sometimes you will have collected enough evidence after a few loops that you can move forward with your project, okay? That, for example, it's time for you now to start building really your first version of your product, like your MVP, okay? To test it further with your customers. But this loop is to remind to the people that the most important in incubation is not about, I will say, prototyping, is about de-risking. You need to de-risk as much as possible to bring all the data, the confidence that you are doing the right thing for the right customer to address the right problems. So this is why, as long as you don't have enough data evidence to tell you you are right, you need to keep, I would say, looping.
It's so difficult though, Vincent and Sarah, so Sarah, for example, you're going to China, you have a bias for action. You really want to get stuck in, you want to show progress, and then you have to take a step back and you have to use a diagram like this, and you're like going, oh, I just want to get started. And when you have to go through that loop, first of all, the discipline to go through that loop, and then the discipline to perhaps do it a second time, it's really hard for a corporate explorer because of this time. You know, you feel like the sands of time are slipping away all the time. And I'd love if you'd share how you manage that when you're talking back to HQ and say, look, I got to go through this process, otherwise I'm going to be squandering money for the company, or how did you position that?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's a totally valid concern that I think all of your listeners who work in corporate will understand and sympathize with. They're always trying to balance de-risking to have that confidence, especially if you're building a new organization, you're a leader in that organization, as well as showing that you're making progress and moving quickly. And sometimes you really have to move quickly to build that momentum in the broader organization, right? And get that buy-in. So I think there's a few different tactics we use to accomplish this. I think making sure that you have strong leadership support is really key. Making sure that you have advocates in your organization who can support you and your different or innovative approach to doing business, because it is very different, right? And already the business model that you're working on is going to be different in itself. And then you add a layer of, okay, our methodology is totally different as well. So make sure that you have the right voices in the right forums to support what you're doing, which I'm saying it very simply, but it's not simple, right? So we actually took a very strategic approach to thinking about who we needed to bring on board along with us. And thankfully, we were able to do that within our organization and the broader organization. But that's just one level, because the experiments are going to get done by your working level team. And in a lot of cases, your team is really lean. You might be under-resourced. Everybody is doing a lot of things outside of their typical scope. And that can be hard to motivate folks to say, okay, we're going to take an approach that you are not familiar with at all outside of your normal work, but we think it's the right thing to do. So there's also, I think, the buy-in that has to happen at the working level as well, like the cultural piece of it, and giving folks that psychological safety to see failure as part of this process. And that takes a lot of effort. And I think that's something I definitely want to emphasize on this podcast in particular, because maybe you read it in a book and, okay, great, the framework, let's follow the framework. But there's that other element of that cultural piece that's so important, and making sure as a leader, as a corporate explorer in your own organization, that you're taking the time to get buy-in with your working level team as well. So spend and dedicate that time to educate them on the process. They're the ones that are going to make it happen. Bring them along for it. Make sure they understand the impact that they're having, the power of the frameworks that you are using. And then make sure also that you're celebrating the failures as well. And I remember the first moment, the result of one of our experiments came back working with Vincent and team, and it was a failed experiment. And it was a very celebratory moment for us because we got information. It was like, oh, this is not what we thought. And that's great. It was actually clear, really clear, right? The experiment allowed us to have that clarity even in our failure, and it allowed us to pivot. So making sure that you're taking time to pay attention to the cultural aspects as well.
Great point. And that failure piece, so many people would try to cover up that failure, but how you position that and go, we saved ourselves millions by not actually going here because we proved it wrong. Vincent, for you,
Yeah.
This is one of the key roles of the consultant here.
Exactly. And I would like just to emphasize what you just say, Aidan. This is sometimes very important to show to the management that by not doing something, how much money you are saving. Because this is where sometimes you may have the spark in their eyes and say, oh, no, I got you. Okay. We have spent maybe 3 weeks to do this experiment, but we are saving 6 months of doing something that nobody needs. And by the way, you saved me $500,000 because that was the plan we had. Okay. Because usually when you start experimenting, people have the feeling that you are slowing down everything. You say, oh, but why are we experimenting? Let's just build it, okay? And I say, yeah, that's fine, because if you are measured just on delivering something, perfect, build it, deliver it. But then if nobody is using it and you are also measuring about the customer adoption, you might be in trouble, okay? So that's why, yes, you might have to invest a little bit time at the beginning to start understanding how to experiment. But as soon as you start doing this one, you are saving a lot of time, money, and resources that you can use on stuff which are demonstrating real progress, real data, and evidence, okay? But this is hard at the beginning for your leaders to understand this one because they have been so used to go to some leadership meetings where you just show the way, I'm sorry to be brutal, but the way you are burning the money you got for your project. Here, you are much more adopting a small step approach where you show progress. And you are not measuring the progress in the same way that you are measuring an exploitation project, because here you have lots of unknown. So you have to also measure differently, I will say, your progress, but showing the way you are saving money, it's a nice way for some people to get it very quickly.
These are the conversations that don't happen early. Like this doesn't happen. And it's great, Sarah, to hear you say that the culture allowed you to even engage with Vincent and the ChangeLogic team to actually go, we're going to do this slowly. We're going to go through these steps so that we don't squander money and waste resource and waste our time as well, and ultimately get to a failure. But if we find those failures or those cracks early, that's actually a huge win. That's a very tough chasm to cross for corporate explorers. And I've been guilty of this, as have so many of our audience, where we're going, if I build something, even if it's not successful, at least I've built it and I can point to it. But that's not what you want to point to. So there's a lot in there, but I wanted to bring it back a step. So Sarah, I'm just thinking about you as a template for many corporate explorers. So you've been given this huge opportunity. the first step is then you go, okay, I need to map this out. You had an existing relationship with ChangeLogic. Vincent becomes your account manager. And then do you guys map it together and you kind of go, this is how we're going to approach it? And then you go for it? Because there's a diagram that I have from the book that I thought it looks like this was the next step then. And I just want to help our audience go, because there's lots of little bits in between that we skip when we have these conversations, but I really want to help other corporate explorers so they get it. So maybe I'll share on the screen this diagram, and maybe you'll talk through us, because this maps to very much to the framework, and this is how you actually stepped into China.
Well, it's a great question because I think the context is really important. When I think it's worth actually taking a step back on it, because I was fortunate enough to join the team, as I mentioned, as employee number 4. And so we were really lean, and then we could all really take a strong leadership position in building the strategic vision for the organization. And for us, I think that was why we were successful with implementing experimentation, because even before we knew who ChangeLogic was, the managing director and the rest of the leadership team, we spent a lot of time being really clear on what our objectives were as an organization. And I think what helped us be more open to accepting this process of experimentation is that our objectives weren't as more typically focused on get XYZ done, but really more focused on the learnings we wanted to generate. And so to simplify it, it was really making sure that we had organized the team around the right incentives that then made it possible to even explore something like what we did with ChangeLogic and with Vincent. And so we didn't explicitly have that relationship or that process in mind. I was not familiar with experimentation at all. Not since taking science classes in school, right? I was very familiar with, at a broad level, obviously the importance of getting data, and we're a very data-centric business, and the importance of market research and getting in front of your consumers and that kind of stuff, but not experimentation explicitly. But I think taking the time to build the right incentives and the right vision early on then led us down this path of thinking about how can we really be successful. And it became clear that de-risking was really important, and that that as a leadership team, we wanted to look beyond the typical approaches to doing that. And that's where ChangeLogic became involved. One of our leadership team members, he had a relationship with ChangeLogic, and so we brought them in. But honestly, it was midstream. And so that's why I think I mentioned that cultural piece, because even by the time that Vincent came involved, the team was growing really quickly, and we had people running. We had experts doing sales, right? We had experts doing marketing, and they were running down the path of the tasks that they needed to get done. And so we introduced this midstream and had to really get everybody at that working level on board with us with the experimentation. So that's kind of how it happened. Truthfully, it did take some time for us to educate the team, to get them on board, to build the right group of folks who were going to focus on the experimentation. We wanted it to sit very cross-functionally. We didn't want this to be siloed with market research experts or marketing experts or commercial experts. We wanted everybody from, or at least a representative from, every discipline as a part of the process. So obviously that requires some education as well. But once we had lined up those right teams, then we were able to work effectively with Vincent and team to start generating experiments. It always takes a bit to get the first few off the ground, lots of questions and trial and error. And then I think once we did that and we got some in market, then we were able to build momentum and really start to get the data and results. And to Vincent's points earlier, demonstrate to our leadership the value of this process as a complement to the traditional methods we were also using to de-risk our business.
So tell us about the first experiment, say, for example, or maybe it was the one that you proved was wrong, the wrong approach. So what actually happens, and maybe we'll use this diagram on the screen to map those steps that you took.
the first was really the assumptions analysis. And I think this is so critical. It's important not to skip this piece of it. And honestly, even as a corporate explorer, if you are not fully on board with experimentation as a process, just start with the assumptions analysis, because that alone is going to reveal so much about your biases as an organization and help frame your thinking from the very beginning. It's still a tactic that I use even in my own work as a marketing professional, even if I don't go into experimentation. But anyway, so we started with the assumptions analysis and really saying what must be true for this business to work. And then, of course, applied that to different offerings that we were exploring. And that was not a short process necessarily, because, again, it was cross-functional. We wanted to have input from the right teams. We wanted to be robust enough. From there, we prioritized the assumptions based on some assumptions we could really quickly answer, either with existing data or data that already existed publicly, third-party data or results from recent market research or things like that. Or some were just simply questions we could get answered within the organization. And then some were true unknowns. And that's where we focused the experimentation. Even building this framework during the process was what happened, right? So we had what on the screen here is this nice, neat framework, but it looked different the first time we were using it, and it evolved to fit what I think make it most effective for our use. But yeah, so then we were able to define the experiment.
And I think if I can add on this, Aidan and Sarah, thank you. What you see on the screen is a great example of one of the experimentation among, I will say, I don't remember how many we run over the last probably 1.5 years of this project, but that was an experimentation where probably most of the time people would have just, I will say, asked customers to get a response to the questions. In that case, we really use like community in China to test, I will say, people's behaviors and figuring out without, I will say, asking them if they will rather opt for solution A rather than solution B. But they were not knowing that we were really testing them. It was made in a way that it was natural for them to get, I will say, this offer in front of them and select A or B. But we were here testing really customer behaviors. And this is where experimentation is very challenging for most of the corporate, is how can I cross the border between people saying and people doing? And this is a good example where we were testing this idea about vehicle subscription services to see if the model we had in mind, where we have multi-branded, would get preference to a model where you have only cars from the same brand, okay? And again, you can have just, I will say, question a few people around and say, do you prefer to rent always car from this brand, or you would like to have a portfolio of brands? And maybe they would have tell you yes. But the problem is that they tell you yes, and the day where the offer exists, they don't use it, okay? Because what they say is not what they do. So here we found a way, using community that was existing in China, to really test their behaviors and to see to which level they are ready to even subscribe for a service which was not yet existing at this stage, okay? So this framework is helping you structuring your assumptions and turning it into something that you can test, measure, and you can take decision. And decision may be just accept that you are wrong, and that's okay. That's a learning. You are not failing. You are just learning that you are right, or you are wrong, or you have enough data telling you that you are right.
Sarah, did you want to add anything?
Just in terms of like the application of the experiments, because we were in the middle of the pandemic when we executed our first set of experiments. And so we started out with more digital focused experiments, and in China, they have, of course, an incredible ecosystem of digital tools, WeChat being a great example of that. And to Vincent's point, then we could really leverage that for understanding community behavior. But eventually we were able to pivot into experiments in real life. And I think that's really important because it's so easy to stay within your corporate environment, stay within your building. And something that ChangeLogic really challenged us to do is to get out of the building, to get in front of customers. Because a secondary benefit to doing these experiments is you give your team exposure to customers in a way that they might not typically get in their normal roles. And I think those learnings go even beyond the results of the experiment as well.
Fantastic. Guys, for people who want to reach out and find you, where's the best place? Sarah, you first. Where's the best place to find you?
You can find me at Sarah's Photo at LinkedIn.
Same for me, LinkedIn, Vincent Ducret, Vincent Ducret. You will find me.
Multiple ways of saying it, Vincent, but it's Vincent Ducret, which is the best way. And it's been a pleasure having you, authors of the Corporate Explorer Fieldbook. And before I finish and before I thank our guests, I want to thank our sponsor, Wazoku, who helps large organizations create effective, sustainable innovation ecosystems that accelerate efficiency gains and new value growth, and does so through intelligent enterprise software that connects and harnesses the powers of employees, suppliers, startups, universities, and the unique Wazoku crowd of problem solvers of 700,000 plus. What Wazoku calls connected collective intelligence, and you can find Wazoku at www.wazoku.com. For now, authors of the Corporate Explorer Fieldbook, Vincent Ducret and Sarah Spoto, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.